Before we get started, we wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com. Now on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everybody, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Let's Get Surety. I've got with me today my co-host and CEO of NASBP, Mark McCallum. Thanks for being on, Mark.
Absolutely. Hi, Kat. Delighted to be back.
I am glad to have you, and I'm excited to talk about this topic. It might scare some people.
Pretty important topic that I think a lot of people don't really understand.
I think that's why they're scared, because they don't understand. That's why we're all here, right, guys? So today we're going to be talking about AI in construction. To do that, we've got with us Puneet Mahajan, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Suffolk. Hey, thanks for being on.
That's great. Great to be here, Mark and Kat. Thanks for having us.
We also have with us Chris Lanzisera, Senior Vice President of Suffolk Design. Thanks for being on today, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And also Doug Ware, Senior Vice President of Risk Management at Suffolk. Thanks for being on.
Thank you very much for having us today.
And last but not least, we have Wanli Zhu, Co-founder and Managing Director of Suffolk Technology. Thanks for being on, Wanli.
Excited to be here.
Well, before we dive into this topic, Puneet, can you just tell us a little bit about Suffolk?
That's great. Firstly, again, we're excited to be here. Suffolk is a general contractor based in Boston. Mm-hmm. We do most of our work across the East and the West Coast with some work here in Texas as well. And about a $5.5 billion in revenue company. We self-perform some scopes of work as well. And then about 5 years ago, we decided we were going to go address some of the acute issues that are impacting the construction industry. That's where we hired Wanli Zhu to help us with the setup of Suffolk Technologies. We hired Chris Lanzisera here to help us set up Suffolk Design. We didn't talk much today about Suffolk Capital. That's our development equity division that we have as well that helps. So basically trying to say, okay, what else creates challenges during construction and how can we create capabilities within the organization to address those issues along the way?
Well, and you bring up the challenges that you face in construction. What are some of those large challenges facing the construction industry right now?
No, I think I've got to start with productivity or lack thereof. Construction as an industry has not seen productivity in a long period of time. What that means effectively is you need more people to build more buildings and without having to be able to get more out of that individual's time at any given point in time. And when 40% of the cost of a building is labor, if you're not getting more out of those people, you're basically going to have an impact on cost. And what that has resulted in is over the last 20 years, the cost to build buildings has outpaced the increase in the value of those buildings. So you're getting less profit if you are an owner of that building along the way. The second issue is people. There's about 7.5 million people that work in construction in the United States, and it's an aging workforce. About 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 4 out of those people are over 55 years old. They're going to retire sometime in the next 10 years, and if an industry is not attracting new talent, you're going to have a real problem along with the productivity issues that are highlighted as well. And then the last piece for me is level of digitization in construction is still a lot lower than most other industries. So if we can simply use technology to digitize the processes within construction, you'll have better information flows, less conflicts. Everyone's on the same page along the way. And I think those are some of the things we at Suffolk are trying to address. The underpinning of all of that is data. Wow. And you really have to fix your processes to collect the information real time so you can actually react to those issues before they become a problem.
But there are a lot of parties involved, right, in each project. So it's not just your own data, it's data from those other parties that are coming to a unique situation, right? So how do you even think about doing that?
I think a lot of this is giving people the incentive. We've got partnerships with our owners that actually pay for a lot of that data to be created in the first place. We convince them to share that data along the way. We do the same with our subcontractor population or the trade population to be able to collect that information. And then we try not to use it as an example for a particular project. You're basically trying to take that data for a process and to be able to address it. And we're doing that pretty effectively in design. We're trying to do that very effectively in some of the tools we're using to get schedule information better along the way as well. And then a lot of our technology partners are capturing new data that never existed. Wanli can talk about examples where we are doing, capturing information using cameras that can be used to learn about issues before as they happen along the way. That's information we never had in the past.
Well, it sounds like you have to, maybe there are precursor actions to build a good base or foundation to make sure you have the right data, not just any data. Is that something that's important to be put in place?
Absolutely. I don't think it precludes us from starting today. But at Suffolk, we started investing in a clean data lake probably 3 years before we started investing in technology. And that was because the technology is much more effective when it's sitting on a data set that we believe to be true. But at the same time, I think technology has also helped us augment the data set that we already had and make it better and more potent to drive conclusions and drive outcomes.
And you had to create a culture to get there, correct?
Absolutely.
And then are you then, for lack of a better term, exporting that culture to your other partners, subcontractors, design professionals, and others that you work with?
We try that all the time. I think we start at home. We've really tried to build a culture where we've tried to make ourselves a data-driven company and a technology-forward company. And that's why we have people like Wanli, people like Chris, people like Doug around the table that are culture carriers for us as it relates to that element. And that's an investment not every company in our space would make. We also try and educate and bring along our partners in the ecosystem along the way, whether it's an owner or a trade partner or even a surety for that matter, and try and encourage them to learn about what is possible so that they can take that back to their organization and start. I don't think this is not a linear process. Right. It's not one step follows another. I think everyone has to figure out what are their most important issues they want to solve and try and put their energy and effort behind it. But having an organization that embraces it is super critical.
You had mentioned earlier about incentives, and as human nature is, we don't like change, right? So we're resistant. So what kind of incentives are out there so that you're aligning those interests to get to where you want to be?
Yeah, listen, I think human beings start with themselves. The biggest incentive for a human being to change is when they see it impacting what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
And so we try a lot to try and sell the value of how people's work will change. And we try and create value at that level. If you start with this is for management and management can ask you more questions, you're gonna walk into a brick wall. Yeah. Right? You really have to start about this makes your life easier. Okay. This gives you have to spend less time doing mundane activities, and you're going to see something in front of you. Then from there, you have to make the decision. I actually think the power of AI is going to be just that. I don't think AI is going to write things for us. We will become editors along the way. And I think that's going to be something. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, Wanli, but you'll talk a lot more about that. But I think I think that's how you drive change, one brick at a time.
So artificial intelligence is one tool to get you there. So what do we mean by artificial intelligence, particularly in this context?
I think the simplest way to think about it is that in most computer programming kind of context, historically speaking, you have to kind of write the specific rule or write the specific algorithm and produce, for the most part, deterministic outcomes. I think when machine learning and AI, and sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but really machine learning is a discipline within AI. So the way to think about AI is that AI is sort of writing the program for you, right? It's dynamic. So in other words, Take an image recognition example. You can feed AI a set of training data that are labeled. For example, pictures of a cat, pictures of a dog, and they're properly labeled. And the machine learns what a cat looks like, what a dog looks like. Sometimes those learnings are not easily articulated or explainable. That's called deep learning. And there are other AIs that are more explainable. And so then you can feed it a picture it's never seen before, and it gives you some confidence level, some probability that it's a dog or a cat, and et cetera. And so it's learning that algorithm, learning those rules, so to speak, in a deeper way. And one of the underlying technologies for it, which has been around for some time, I know AI is a mainstream topic now, but AI has been around for some time. Yeah. And one of the techniques used in that is called a neural network. It's literally a set of nodes with a set of weights, and these weights get learned over time, and it's layers of these nodes that look like neurons in a brain. And you feed it an input and out comes an output. And it goes through these layers of prediction and calculations that lead to that nonlinear output. So that's one way to think about AI is a dynamic learning approach to programming.
And if you take it one step further, just AI to generative AI, what's that difference there?
Yeah, so generative AI has taken that kind of neural network model to a whole new level. Yeah. It's operating in a much larger data set. Currently, it's working mostly around text data and text information, being able to predict the most likely next word from a set of words. That's the simple explanation. There's a lot more going on there. And I think one of the opportunities we have in the built environment is to start to combine that with image data and visual information, because we're working with visual physical assets, right? Where Puneet mentioned we're kind of capturing information about what's going on a job site using cameras, for example, and sensors. Okay. And fusing that information together across different sensor types even, using AI in some cases. And so being able to combine a generative set of technologies that operate on text with visual information, training those in pairs and together, now you get into the possibility of potentially querying real-world visual information using textual concepts. Imagine being able to search through videos, search through image libraries, and have the response be coming back to you around these text concepts. So show me all the cases where XYZ happened, and the algorithm would understand that search meaning and go to that visual information and come back with an answer. So that's where a lot of the exciting intersection of with this generative with traditional AI can happen.
Wow. And I imagine that's getting towards efficiencies and ultimately to productivity.
And risk management too.
Absolutely, risk management. But let's be honest, I mean, construction over its history has been rather adversarial. And a lot of that is dealing with the risk environment and trying to figure out where does risk lie. So these are difficult questions, I imagine, to be looked at, considered, and dealt with. I imagine that's much on your mind these days as you're trying to develop that technology and utilize it in the different ways you might be able to utilize it on a project.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the risk management piece of it, we have a bunch of people within our organization, superintendents, project managers, they're looking to solve the problems, right? That present themselves. So being able to get the information that Juan Lee has talked about, information that Puneet was talking about with productivity and skilled workforce, that really allows them to sit there and say, hey, how does this benefit me to solve that problem and move the project forward, meet that schedule, meet that budget, right? So when you start to think about that, well, it is potentially a risk if you take on some of that, but at the same time, it's a known risk or a predictable risk that we can look at. And so when I really start to think about this, yes, it's still managing the risk, but at the same time, you're learning and understanding how you're going to control it better going forward. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So how important then, because ultimately it's the owner's project, correct? So how important is it for you to have the conversation with the owner that we can get to a more productive place on your behalf, get you the building that you want faster, cheaper, and so forth. But we need to look at how we're going to share the risk. Is that an easy dialogue? Is that how you go about it? Or is there a different way?
I think there's multiple ways you can go about it. And I also think it depends on the client and what they're doing with that building. Right? Are they going to hold that building and operate it? They may have a very different vested interest in what's going to happen there, right? So if they're going to hold it for a long time, they're going to want to talk about how that building's going to perform. Is that helpful to have a Wint-like product on there that they can then have that understanding how the water usage is in that building, right? Whereas somebody that might be developing it to flip it and not hold on to it, they may be much more on the cost side of it, right? And saying, hey, I'm only looking at the bottom line of that pro forma and the cost piece of it. So I think that discussion varies depending on who that client is and what you're looking at. But either of them, you can take some of these technologies that we're talking about, the AI and the data that we have, to show them, hopefully, hey, this is a better way to do it. This is something that's going to mitigate exposures, because even if you're looking at it from a cost standpoint, you want to flip the switch and get that building operating. Right. So how does that data and the things that we're utilizing allow them to get there quicker?
So are these the kinds of tools that can also help bridge your construction planning, your pre-construction, and the design?
Yeah.
And I imagine, again, it's a team process. Getting that's an important component of the overall achievement.
So sort of picking up where Doug left off there, imagine your completed buildings of the future are, populated with sensors and various technologies, building management systems that are far more intelligent than they've been in the past. And we can leverage that very data, right, to make better decisions while we're designing the projects, right? So if you think about that, we can, even for the commercially driven project, the one that is going to be flipped, if we can use that data to make more profitable buildings for our developers up front early with those design decisions, right? You have this incredible opportunity, again, to recycle that data. Similarly, if during the construction phase we identify issues that arise consistently, we can triangulate around them in the form of requests for information, RFIs, those sort of things.
Right.
And we can take that data and bring that up front earlier. We can truly have a lessons learned model that we've always struggled to have in the past, and apply that with our architects. You asked at the very beginning of the conversation, what is that relationship with, say, architects, or how is that that interface working, right? We found that because we are using data and our insights in a non-punitive way, right? We're trying to do this in a way that betters our overall end project. I think in the end, despite the fragmentation of the industry, we generally have a common interest in having a great project at the end. That's what we're all here for.
Yep.
And so I think if we can use insights and bring them to the table and allow people to benefit from them earlier through the data we're collecting, on previous projects even, that gives us an incredible opportunity moving forward. And that's sort of the promise of the technologies we're looking at right now.
It's kind of interesting to me that it seems like in one way technology is serving the purpose of aligning interests. And I'd be curious the kind of thoughts on integrated project delivery and how you see that as kind of, does that fit into this space ultimately?
Yeah, I think, one of the areas we've explored more than integrated project delivery, more than IPD. We are really focused on executing design build exceptionally well. Design build offers, that incredible sort of synergy between the architect and the builder to be able to actually leverage both our relationships and our working and our contractual structure, but then to begin to share this information in a way that is so much more transparent and fluid than it otherwise would have been. Yeah. Suddenly that differentiation between the model and who is working on the model and who that starts to fade away as we find ways to strategically work together to eliminate issues before they even become issues, right? I mean, think about optimization, making those design decisions early, leveraging our, we talked briefly about, pre-construction estimating. We have an in-house tool that we've built, which we've now commercialized, which is an online estimating platform called Edify, which has incredible amounts of real-time data that we can deploy during the pre-construction phase to make design decisions based on actual costs that are relevant today, right? And so you look and say, hey, what's the best, building enclosure system for this particular project, we can evaluate 3, 4, 5 of them in real time in the meeting where we're making that decision. And that's the kind of tools that we're trying to bring to the industry.
So, that's a great concrete example of the use of this technology. Would you mind giving us some further examples? It sounds like it could be used in many different ways to improve the process. What are some of the ways right now that you're seeing real return on use of that technology?
I want to just add one more point to what Chris described, which is around the vision that he just laid out. And it's really exciting when you think about how these technologies can converge. And we'll maybe touch on robotics a little bit as well. But let me kind of maybe paint the bigger picture around how this can all come together, right? So Chris touched on cost estimating, design optioneering. Today, design drives cost, meaning cost estimating happens after design is proposed, and there's a lot of iterating that happens, which sometimes can be pretty inefficient. So when we have an algorithmic approach to it and a data-driven approach, we can turn that into a fully parameterized process, a fully parametric process. And so an algorithm can generate a design based on the target cost, for example, and show a developer a series of options around what a building can look like. And because it's fully parameterized, you can now make changes. And once you make these changes, the design and the estimates can all update in real time, actually. And so what Chris has described, the ability to bring the cost information into the design tool, even through modern APIs and fusing of that data, and then applying generative AI to it is incredibly powerful. And now let me describe how that can feed into execution, right? Imagine you can now feed the plan to a robotic system that's on the job site working alongside the skilled trades to execute that work. It's a fully digital path now. There's no kind of inefficient leakage. There's no sort of efficiency leakage in the conversion from the digital to an analog process, which is how work is being done today. So imagine feeding into a robotic system. The robot's working alongside experts, right, on the job site. And then the robot is able to feed the data back to the model based on what it's scanning and understanding what's happening on the job site. And we mentioned sensors and cameras and various sensors that can fuse that information together. So our ultimate vision is to make it not just an automated process to replace human experts and human labor, but to augment the process, reduce rework, reduce errors.
Right.
And so one of the robotic solutions we've adopted is around layout. Instead of using chalk and people going and marking up where everything's going to go on the site, on the floor, the robot actually takes the architectural drawings and the model. It can coordinate across multiple trades and then print exactly where everything's going to go, the drywall track, the MEP system, all with the notes. And so if there's a clash, you can detect it early and there's a problem. So about 5% of the industry spend today in construction in terms of total volume is spent on fixing mistakes. $1.3 trillion industry in the US, 5%, $65 billion or so of that is in rework, fixing mistakes that could potentially be avoided.
Right.
And so when you can connect a digital plan using AI with a robotic system, you can potentially really get at reducing those mistakes. In addition to addressing labor shortage, as Puneet mentioned earlier, and then potentially even reducing materials waste. When a robot's executing that work, you can end up with less wasted material as well. We've got a drywall robotics technology that we've invested in and have been partnered with for our trades to use. And they do a single compound precision spray. And so it's less wasted material in finishing the drywall as well. And reducing injury because there's a lot of repetitive stress injury that come from finishing the drywall. It's a trade that has very low retirement rates because people are getting injured, they got to retire early.
Right.
So the robot is potentially addressing cost rework as well as labor constraints.
Yeah, my mind is racing a little bit with all the potential. I mean, and you talked about material wastage, but I mean, also, how do you then interface with the supply chain? So now you can predict when you need materials and when they should be delivered, and then also in terms of the insurance and maybe even surety aspects of that for storage and security. And
absolutely,
I mean, that's crazy stuff.
I like where you're going with that. Exactly. How do you extend that into the supply chain?
Right.
If you have that information available around what you need to procure, can you have a software interface for procuring those materials? And then this is not really AI, but it's more of a business model innovation.
Yep.
We're all used to shopping online and Amazon. We saw what Amazon has done to the retail space. We've looked at companies, and we're looking at one right now that's compressing the supply chain on average between 3 to 5 intermediaries from when the materials comes out of the factory and when it lands on the job site. So can you start to go direct to factory, maybe put instrumentation in place around quality control at the point of production, and then put GPS tracking on the container so that you get full visibility into when that material is being shipped through the supply chain, and then compress the supply chain into fewer intermediaries, and then make that available to the job site all through a software interface. So that's starting to happen.
Wow.
And you can then, as you said, connect that to the needs and the model. The issue here is data fragmentation, as we've talked about earlier, right?
Yep.
Because we have several dozen trades involved in a project. You've got the GC, you've got the owner. And so how do you make that information more available? So if there is a delay, how do you create an early warning sign?
Right.
So that other parties can be aware of that and react appropriately around project schedule and adjusting that schedule even and resequencing. So part of it is a data problem as much as an AI problem and behind a business model innovation.
And I think, Mark, just to stitch a lot of this together, and it's rather simplistic, but I'll give the example. Think of a world in the future where the architect gets you an accurate set of shop drawings and quantities.
Right.
That goes into an estimating system that gives the owner some degree of confidence behind cost. That ultimately goes into a subcontractor's contract for their scope of work, who then uses a marketplace to actually buy the material quantities at the best possible price, taking out some of the intermediaries in the process. That is then tracked with the procurement and delivery log, where you know exactly where that material is, so it's going to arrive on the site at the right time. And then you have a visual sense of the work that is being put in place, and does that tie to your execution plan associated with the work you wanted to put in place in a certain period of time. Also photo documenting the quality that can ultimately be documented in the building. And that's what drives productivity. That's what the future can be if we can get all of these things to stitch together.
When I'm, maybe taking it one step further, it kind of boggles the mind that maybe on the life cycle, you could even ultimately go, your operations and maintenance needs, scheduling that, knowing when that has to happen, then ultimately, is there an expiration date on the building? And knowing that in the future and then starting the life cycle again. That's, again, pretty mind-blowing. And so that's something.
Well, how can the surety professionals help you with this process? What can we do and be involved and promote this as well?
Listen, I think it's a lot of different things. The first and foremost is, I think the surety professionals need to work with their clients and say, what's the one or two most important things that move the needle? I think we talked about culture. We talked about, at the end of the day, people need to focus, because you can't do 5 things at the same time. Every trade, every general contractor, every owner has a different set of needs that they need to solve. Some might come from their position of strength. Some might be their weaknesses. The second thing is, Chris talked about it, Juan Lee talked about it, data is king. Mm-hmm. And the most important element in this is having good data. Anybody who can help aggregate the data industry-wide is only going to help accelerate the development. I think if we all stick to our own data sets, we are not going to... you'll still make progress, just not at the speed at which it can be done if we were going to do it. The third is incentives. I think there's a lot the sureties can do to give people the incentive to be able to drive things forward. And then the last piece for me is embrace the change. I think culturally, I think, Mark, you said it, humans are resistant to change. I think this one's coming. Yeah. Just go back to, it blows my mind that the first iPhone only came out in 2007. Right. And the rate of change that has happened in the last 15 years. And I think AI is going to be as big, if not bigger, than the internet and the mobile device, right? So I think that's going to be transformative. And we've all got to just say, okay, how do we want to use it, and what are the priorities we have?
Wow.
Yeah. I just want to thank all of you for being on with us, just learning about all these possibilities and the bright future that's ahead if we can all embrace change. Thanks so much for being on.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, Visit NASBP.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety again for their generous support in supporting this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com.